Okay. Today we're going to be going over the California wildfires, specifically the LA fire. We're a little short-staffed because a lot of the PSSA went to the Capitol on a trip, so that's why I'm the highest-ranking person left, I suppose. And so the the LA fires currently are ranking in at around $40 billion in damage. And an interesting factoid is that 8 out of the 10 largest wildfires have occurred in the last 5 years in California. So why is that happening?
All right. For those of you who have not been here before, we do this every week, every Wednesday at noon. Right here in the lobby. You are welcome to participate. You don't have to. We will also, though, we will be passing around an attendance sheet in a few minutes that will verify your attendance. If you list a faculty member next to your name, we will contact that faculty member. We can't guarantee any extra credit, but we will let them know that you attended here. This is an open forum, so please feel free to jump in at any time. We are live streaming on our YouTube channel, and so feel free to participate. So, what about the fires?
I think looking at the fires from the sort of government perspective, I see a lot of similarities to the hurricane that happened a few months ago. So a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of panic, a lot of sort of issues with how information was getting around. And I'm kind of nervous about what will be the next disaster and how will we approach it, because it seems like as these things happen, panic is getting more and more, sort of getting higher as more misinformation spreads. So, yeah, I don't know. That's sort of my observation of this certain issue. It's how the media is responding to it, and how social media especially is looking at it. So yeah.
Maybe this is a silly question to ask, but is social media responding in a fair manner?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. I'm shocked that you would say so.
I know that California has a lot of wildfires. It feels like almost every single year it happens, but I feel like this year, because it hit a lot of Hollywood celebrity homes, it's been kind of capitalized almost on the fact that, oh my God, celebrities are losing their homes now. It's not just like civilians of California. And I know that I watched the Grammys on Sunday, and they had turned the Grammys into kind of like a donation thing. They were contributing, I think small businesses had commercials in between acts, and I think before every single performance, they're like, scan a QR code, donate to help the people whose homes have been displaced by the fires. But I think that was the first time that had happened.
Mm-hmm. So you think maybe the fact that the fires have been in an area that's populated by many celebrities, that it's gotten more attention than other fires?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay.
I would say it was more attention than the fires that happened, I think, 2 years ago, that also happened in LA. And I think those were like, before this one, the ones 2 years ago, I want to say, back in like maybe 23, those were, I think, the biggest ones yet, and then this one finally surpassed that. But of course, it didn't get talked about as much because it happened in a relatively just normal area compared to the sort of upper middle class or downright wealthy class of neighborhoods in LA. So yeah, I think that's definitely an aspect of it. So yeah.
So is this just the cost of living, or is there anything we can do to minimize or prevent these things? I know that's a kind of question that's been bandied about a lot, but what can we do? Do we just have to live with the idea? Is this something we got to worry about here? There's a lot of forest around here. Is this going to happen here anytime soon? I lived up on Crown Mountain many years ago, and I have seen fires up on the mountains to our north. Nothing anywhere near what's going on in California now, nothing even close to that. But I've seen it. Is it going to be something that we have to worry about?
I mean, probably getting to the, like, maybe the more root cause of why they're getting more and more intense is, climate change. The summers are getting hotter and drier, so it's, creating more kindling for these huge, massive wildfires to go out of control. And, it has the possibility to make North Georgia a drier, hotter place. So yes, it can very well spread here if, we allow it to continue as it does.
I mean, here it is early February and it's 70 degrees out.
Yeah.
Which I will say, in all fairness, has happened before, but this still seems unusual for this time of year. So is there anything, have we been poor at, now actually that's something that I say, I often say, and you may have heard me say this before, especially if you've been here in previous years, that Americans tend to be very good in the moment, but we're very bad at planning and we're very bad at following up. So when the fires strike, we tend to want to help, we tend to try to do something about it, but do we do enough to prevent them from happening? And do we do enough to make changes after they happen?
Yeah, I just read an article by the New York Times about the cleanup, basically, and I believe the mayor of Los Angeles said I think they wanted to, before official rebuilding can take place with contractors, they have to do a cleanup by the EPA and then state services, and the mayor I think proposed 18 days, I want to say, for cleanup. From what I last read, and those are already a kind of big concern because with cities becoming ever more technology-wise becoming more advanced. One of the concerns was lithium-ion batteries and how they can cause fires and they're a mess to clean up, and there's already sort of issues regarding how long the cleanup should be. There was already, in terms of the federal government, Trump supposedly was telling the mayor to basically have it be done faster, have the cleanup happen faster so that people can get back in their homes. Well, the issue is that if they do a sloppy job cleaning up these toxic chemicals, or just do a bad job to where it can lead to more fires, next year, then
yeah, I was going to say, can it be done faster? Is that a wise thing to do?
It seems very much an issue. And also, on the more economic side, I've read that there's already been issues of price gouging. So people who've been displaced out of their homes, landlords who now have this real estate opened up for a new market of people who have just been displaced, have instantly raised their rent, so to price gouge people who don't have a home. So, in terms of the cleanup, and yet also the cleanup of the last natural disaster in North Carolina, it's not the greatest.
I mean, like, piggybacking off of that, there are some parts of like New Orleans that have just never recovered from Hurricane Katrina, and that's like been like forever ago.
Nearly 20 years ago. That's what.
Yeah, 20 years this year.
Yeah.
And there are just some parts that are still like it's just like ruined, and like there's no like they never like got fixed. There was never proper investment to go in and like rebuild that part of the city.
So you wouldn't be surprised if that were the same thing were to happen there? Or do you think because of the celebrity status that it might get extra attention?
Well, I think it's because like, well, LA is probably like, you know, like barring New York, like one of the most productive cities in like the United States. So like, it's probably going to get refixed. Unfortunately, they're probably going to rebuild it as it was, which, you know, this probably could have been a good opportunity to reorganize the hellish urban planning
Right.
at Los Angeles, but no, they're just going to build
Right.
it as it was, and you know, but
I mean, our focus here is on the LA fires, but are there any parallels to the storm damage that happened in North Carolina and Tennessee over the when was it? Over the summer or early fall? And do we know anything about their rebuilding? It seems like it's gone awfully quiet there since the initial. Again, the initial outpouring was tremendous, helping people, all sorts of things, but it seems to have gone really quiet, and I don't recall, I will be honest and say I haven't actually looked, but I don't recall any big notices about, oh, Western Carolina's back, we've fixed it all, and et cetera, et cetera. And that fits in with what I was suggesting before. We're really bad at following up on these things. I mean, is this just a pattern that's going to keep happening, disaster after disaster? This isn't the last disaster that's going to happen.
I mean, this is like literally the country that put off like the slavery issue until it literally ripped the country in half, and like it came to like that head, you know what I mean? Like it was such a contentious nation dividing issue that wasn't resolved until it literally had to be resolved through mass violence. You know, and like even after like the reparations thereafter, you know, of like trying to, you know, get Black Americans to be, you know, integrating into the economy, they just completely let go of that. And then like, you know, we had to come back in the 60s and try and fix that as well. I mean, it's like, it's kind of almost embedded in the nation's DNA to like procrastinate as much as possible on issues.
Yeah, go
Well, I
ahead.
think also like one of the parallels that like you brought up about like the economy and everything. I feel like with the hurricane and everything that I've read about, like price gouging during that time too, and it's probably still happening. And the fact that it's happening again, like in California, I don't know if things are gonna get like fixed, to be honest.
My dad has a manager that he works with that lives in the Asheville area that was near the huge flooding that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that his friend had to obviously be displaced from his home, but that he's moved back to the area, and he said that life there is kind of going on, but there still is that kind of air of...
They've just kind of adapted to
Yeah.
the situation.
It hasn't really gone back to the way that it was before, but they've just kind of accepted that it did happen, and that it might happen again, that if things don't change, but he hasn't heard of anything that they're doing to prevent it from happening again.
I mean, I did like a little follow-up on the recovery efforts, and I'm seeing like some local news coverage that still has like places that are still like leveled, like, you know, like there's still...
And there's still lots of places that are on fire.
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't
Yeah.
put them out yet, right?
Yeah, but even for like the hurricane recovery, there's still like...
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
the
there's...
Carolinas.
Yeah, even for the hurricane recovery, I'm like looking at this image, and there's like this like entire like small town like street area is still just like completely ruined, so it doesn't seem like it's going too fast.
Well, I have friends in New Orleans that like their houses are still like
Yeah.
completely like torn out. Like they're like living like in their like basement right now because it's like they still haven't even.
So is there anything, I mean, this is an awfully big question to ask, but is there anything we can do? Is there any way that we can become better at this?
More funding for FEMA.
More funding for FEMA?
If not, move to the State Department.
Okay. Right now, it seems like that's going in the opposite direction, if I'm correct. Is there anything, I mean, again, FEMA is a reactive organization. They come in after things have already happened. And again, we need that. We do need that. And I don't disagree with you at all that more funding for FEMA and expanded, wherever it is, government response would certainly help. But is there any chance that we are going to, again, instead of just letting these people adapt to a deteriorated condition, is there anything that we can do to get people to plan better? Now, I'm not an expert in this, not by any means, but one of the things that I had heard suggested about, for example, North Carolina, and actually it applies to the LA area as well, is things like zoning laws, where people can build homes that too many in North Carolina and eastern Tennessee, that area, the Appalachian area that was hit the worst, too many people were allowed to build in places that would have been the first to go in a situation like this. And the same thing may very well be true in Los Angeles, that there are too many homes in the mountains that surround the area that would be the first to go and were the first to go in these fires. Is there any chance that we're going to be better at saying no to people, you can't build here in the future? Or is it just a matter of, I've got the money, I'll do whatever I want?
Well, I guess this is kind of happening with hurricanes, but it's not like a government initiative. It's just like the flood insurance is getting so unbelievably high because insurance companies obviously recognize that like the chances of flooding have gone up like precipitously, and like the chances of like your home being like wiped out by like a hurricane have gone up. So people are getting priced out of being able to live on the coast by the exorbitant like flood insurance. So like there's kind of like a, I guess, market pull to get people away from like, the first strike areas, and like Miami has basically undergone this civic works effort to like lift the entire city up like a few inches to like account for rising sea levels. So I mean, all of this is kind of more like expensive, like I get, preventative medicine, I suppose, but to like the real problem, like the underlying disease, which is the fact that we haven't really tried to stop the emissions rate at all.
So I never thought that I would be saying this, but it sounds like, to at least some extent, our savior might be the insurance companies.
Well, the insurance companies did that in California, and they, homeowners weren't allowed to get fire insurance.
The same in Florida too. A lot of flood insurance companies in Florida have completely exited some of the areas. So I think with Asheville, it was such an anomaly because no one would have expected a hurricane storm surge to happen in the Appalachian region. So building these houses on areas that could be at risk, no one would in a million years think that. But
You're right. No,
with,
you're right.
with areas like LA and
Much more predictable there.
and southern
we
Florida,
could see this coming in LA.
yeah, it becomes more predictable and knowable, and so I think the way in which we want to improve these situations is really just strengthening our government infrastructure. Our infrastructure nationally is really old, extremely out of date, and really old and starting to crumble. And with climate change, of course, it's going to just make the process go faster. And I do kind of wonder what's going to be like our nexus point. Like, what happens if a disaster hits a major city or a whole region, and we can't bounce back from it? What if there's too many fires in LA? What's going to happen? LA has such a large GDP, California in general, that it's our top state for producing. And what happens if a disaster so big, strikes it that we can't rely on that? I mean, there's a really big shockwave that could happen with these places. So, yeah.
I've been around long enough, I know I don't look it, but I've been around a while, to see really what I have thought of as a change in the sort of American attitude. So much of it decades ago was we can do it. We can reshape the earth. For better or for worse. Some of that was not really good. But some of it was, you know, these disasters that happen, we're going to move right in and we're just going to get it taken care of and get it done and we can do it. And much of what we've talked about now in the last couple of decades, much of what we've talked about here is just, okay, it's happened and we're just going to adapt and we're not going to change, we're not going to try and prevent it, we're just going to live with it. Am I seeing, is there anything wrong with what I'm seeing? Has there been a change in the sort of American attitude from a sort of from a sort of we can do it, you know, the old World War II poster, right? We can do it, to now we just have to live with it? Am I seeing that or am I wrong or what?
I would say no, because of how people reacted to Hurricane Helene and how the community came together because there was no communication. And the locals with their own private helicopters were flying the mountainsides and finding people that weren't able to get help. So I would say the attitude is still there. It's going to be only in times of when we need that attitude, but it's there still, I would say.
Well, I think there's definitely a bit of a change in attitude because like a lot of our like infrastructure, especially like the electrical stuff, is like, you know, when they built it is when it was last, you know, touched. And, you know, there's not like, you know, you go back to like, you know, like the works projects of like, you know, the New Deal and stuff. And, you know, there was this huge effort to like really like modernize and like develop the countryside and like, you know, invest all these resources in running electrical lines out to these, you know, out to the rural, you know, building all the great highways, you know, massive infrastructure projects, dams, you know, just everything. And now we haven't, I mean, I don't even know what the last like grand like infrastructure project has really been.
Yeah, yes, that's kind of exactly what I was thinking of. The interstate highway system in the 1950s. Okay, we take all that for granted now, but that was a huge thing that was done. Look up the Tennessee Valley Authority. There are, I've been sort of cataloging, not literally, but sort of cataloging some YouTube videos for possible use in my American government classes about the Tennessee Valley Authority. And this was something that was done in the 1930s that completely reshaped this area, okay? Or even more especially, people who were living just north of here, to bring electricity and to bring water to this area. Rivers were completely changed and rerouted with series of dams to make sure that the water flow was distributed in ways that broadened the farming area. Electricity, again, no private electric company would move into the Appalachian area because it just wasn't profitable. The TVA was created because, again, people in this area and just north of here, as late as the 1930s, were living in essentially 19th century conditions with no electricity and no conception that could actually happen. One of the interesting things about these videos, and again, you can find them on YouTube. One of the interesting things about these videos is they were put out by the Tennessee Valley Authority, by the Roosevelt administration, by various New Deal agencies, and there were films showing, and I realize when you go look at them, a lot of them are produced and scripted, et cetera, and they were designed to advertise and sell just as much as inform. I realize that. But it's interesting to see how they were attempting to explain to people what we're going to do and how it's going to change your life and how it's going to improve things. And Has anything like that happened in recent decades?
I mean, that's the main thing I was talking about. There's not like a passion in like civic investment.
Yeah.
You know, there's not like a, there hasn't been like a broadband rollout into like I guess that would be like.
I was just going to say, that's probably the last thing that I could think of is the development of the internet and convincing people that I'll never forget, again, this 20, 25 years ago, this building used to look completely different. Although this lobby is actually one of the few things that looks somewhat similar.
If I'm not mistaken, this is a WPA building.
Yes, it is. You see the plaque out in front, and I usually show that to my American government students. It is. It's a Works Progress Administration building, and you see the plaque out in front that has Franklin Roosevelt's name on it. Downstairs used to house the political science department. We weren't over there. We were downstairs. Political science and history and anthropology and criminal justice. When I first started here in the early 1990s, this whole thing about internet, the web wasn't even on anybody's mind. And the whole thing about internet and email was brand new. And I remember the department head for history, Ray Renzi. And if you go to the history department, there may still be things. Big, friendly, burly guy, looked like Santa Claus. Right? White hair, big, bushy, white beard. Very much a local product. But he was the department head in history. And he came into my office once. I had the classroom down below here on this side, where there's as you come into this classroom and the one below it, there's a big supported post on there. Downstairs, that post was right in the middle of my office. Okay, I had the smallest office, and it had that post right in the middle of it. And I was in there once on my computer. Okay, we were just getting computers in offices was brand new back then, and let alone internet. We didn't know what this internet or web stuff was. And I remember Ray Renzi, the history department head, coming in, and I had, I'm fiddling around with this brand new thing called a web browser, and he comes in, he pokes his head in my office, and he's as tech savvy as anybody was in the department. And he's kind of, we're talking about this stuff, and he goes, I forget exactly what he said, but it was something to the effect of, the only way this is going to catch on is if people figure out a way to make money off of it. And boy, was he right. Okay. But nonetheless, a lot of it was government inspired. The whole internet was created. What originally began as Defense Department, ARPANET, okay, and grew into what we now know as the internet. And that may have been, we're talking now about 1980s, 1990s, when it was eventually opened up to commercial activity and people did learn how to make money off of it. That's really the last thing I can think of that was sort of any major government investment in some large infrastructure project that really changed our lives. Now you had the Biden infrastructure bill in 2021, which we've seen a few projects, but a lot of that is just sort of maintenance, and a lot of it is spread out into the future. So, there really is no one concentrated, we're doing this to rebuild America or anything like that. Is there ever going to be anything again? Or it seems, again, getting back to this shift from can do to can't do, it seems we are more focused now on protecting what we've got rather than investing on any kind of improvement or expansion. Am I wrong in that, or does that ring a bell, or what?
I think you're right. I think also, I've noticed that all the innovations that I can think of that are the most major, that's had a major impact on society, have all been innovations to win wars and to be the best country out of the rest of the countries. And I feel like right now that's not really happening. It's more of like, okay, we need to aid with this, or like we need to make sure that this war doesn't happen, and I feel like we're all kind of stuck in this area where we want to just stay the same, and we want, well, this is good enough, so we need to stay here. And I feel like a lot of not like nationalism, but I feel like a lot of just like support for like our own country is kind of diminished. But that's my take on it.
Well, I think one of the biggest things is like, I guess kind of like the shift in the 90s. Well, it was starting in the 80s, but like, you know, when the Democrats like basically walked over and then agreed with the Republicans economically on like neoliberalism. It was kind of the, you know, the freer the market, the freer the people kind of idea. You know, the taste for like the government doing stuff kind of soured a little bit. You know, it was more about how can we get like the private sector to do stuff. You know, it was all about, you know, cutting government funding, you know, focusing on the deficit. You know, that's like the most important thing is like, oh, we're still deficit spending and all that. So there's not really like an appetite in like American politics to be the one to like step forward and be like, we need to do like this huge, massive investment bill that isn't in response to an economic crisis. So,
yeah, and again, I think, I think what I have seen change over time, you know, in the 1940s, 1930s and 40s, I haven't been around that long, but in the 1930s and 40s, you have, again, Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, which is a huge investment in infrastructure and economics and government support, et cetera, et cetera. You have Eisenhower's interstate highway system. You know, Eisenhower, you know the origins of that, or the story behind it is Eisenhower was, you know, we know that he was commander of the Allied troops in World War II, and he was in the Army long before that, and he was part of, shortly after World War I, he was part of a sort of a test group in the Army for sort of national defense and supply line kind of things that tried to travel cross-country, you know, from California to New York, or I don't know the exact route, but something like that. And a young Dwight Eisenhower was part of that. And that had a lasting impression on him because it was extremely difficult for them to travel, even as the automobile was beginning to catch on. And automobiles were originally not for personal transport, but they were for farm work, for defense work, for, you know, tanks and things like that, and for farmers and construction workers hauling, you know, trucks were the original thing, not personal cars. And that stuck in Eisenhower's mind. And, you know, 20, 30 some odd years later, that led to him pushing for the interstate highway system. In the 1960s, we have the space race and, you know, other things. But by the time we get to the 1970s and 80s, you know, it went from, we can do these big, massive things. We can land someone on the moon. We can change the course of rivers and reshape the land in literal fashion, to Ronald Reagan's famous phrases in the 1980s, where he said, you know, the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Or the other one that he said was, government isn't the solution, government is the problem. So we began to shift in the 1980s away from that idea of we can take care of these things. Now, again, I do want to suggest that not all of it was necessarily good. The idea that we can just do anything and everything and reshape the land, sometimes that was done without thinking about the consequences for reshaping the land. You know, the concern back then was you reroute rivers to bring water to arid land, you may deprive other areas. And that's something that we've seen in Southern California. What's the river there that used to go all the way to the Gulf of California and doesn't anymore? It's been diverted so much to inland farmland that it just ends. It just doesn't end. I'm not a geologist or anything like that, but rivers don't just end. They empty out into an ocean or a sea or a bay or a lake or something. But that whatever it is, that river just stops now because it's been diverted so often.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to your point where you mentioned how, are people wanting to invest, or do they want to, or are they kind of just wanting to protect what they have? And that's really interesting because I think what we've seen since the 80s, especially with the multiple recessions we've had, from the 80s to 2000s to now, is that people, at least even on an individual and even government level, especially with the current administration, are just kind of keeping to themselves and wanting to cut spending. There's not a lot of, we've seen the Department of Government Efficiency, slash budgets, freeze funding for important programs, and even now, like, people are more concerned with the price of, with their own personal issues, like the price of eggs or housing, than public works. Now, of course, there is, like, that is your weekly finances are a legitimate concern, but I think since we've sort of been in these recessions that have, maybe if not surely economically longer, but to a person it feels longer, we've seen them become more and more of a sort of fending for themselves idea, a sort of way of thinking, and that has severely affected the government on both a local, state, and federal level. So, yeah, I think with how these people think during these recessions, we don't live in a time of excess that we can spend on these government resources.
Now, I think the interesting thing about this, and I have lived long enough to see these recessions that you're talking about, and the period of time in the 1970s and 80s were periods of time of really a very feverish economy that just kind of, there were long stretched out periods of time when not everything was great, there were, gas shortages and economic recessions in the early 70s and the mid 70s and the late 70s and the early 1980s. It was more like a period of spotty recessions over 1970s, 1980s into the 1990s. A period of spotty recessions with a period of growth here and there. And culminating in the recession, which was relatively mild in the early 1990s. Since that time, it's been almost flipped. Since the 1990s, for the most part, we have had pretty good economic times. I mean, if you look at the numbers over these 30 years, it's been pretty good, with the exception of two of the worst recessions we've ever had. The financial collapse in 2008 and the disruption of COVID in 2020. But both of those were, the financial collapse lasted a little bit longer, and COVID itself obviously lasted a couple of years. But the financial effects were not long lasting. We went into the 2010s in pretty good shape. And when the COVID stuff hit, yeah, there were disruptions, and we had high unemployment, and we had inflation, and inflation tended to continue longer than we expected. But the economy now is in pretty good shape. So it seems kind of odd to me. I mean, I can understand a change in the 70s and 80s. Things are bad for long periods of time. Not horrible, not like the two that we've seen in the last 15 years, but just constantly. We used to say, 5% unemployment was structural unemployment. When I learned basic economics, we were taught 5%, because people change jobs, people move, people, there are all sorts of things that cause unemployment at least a little bit. And so we just have to take 5% for granted, because that's what they call structural unemployment. But by the time we get to the 1980s, people started saying, well, maybe it's 7%. Maybe we have to live with a higher level of unemployment. And so there was a period of, again, a couple of decades where we went through that. And there have been two big exceptions, as I said, in the last 30 years. But except for those exceptions, we would almost say now that it's not 5% even, it's been down towards 4% or 3-something percent. I mean, what the unemployment rate now is what, 4%, 4.1%? And yet, nobody thinks the economy is, I mean, the public perception
Exactly.
is completely different from what reality is. Were you gonna, I didn't mean to.
Oh, no. I kind of agree with that, and I agree with your point on how people, I feel like everyone's becoming more complacent with how they are and just liking just to keep what they already have. And I think that has a lot to do with like technology now, because I feel like everyone's kind of just like on their phones all the time, or like, oh, well, I want to like keep TikTok, or I want to ban TikTok, and I just feel like it's a lot of that, and it's not a lot of like innovation, or like we should be like doing something about this, and yeah, just like complacency, I guess.
Okay, just to wind up, we're in the last few minutes now. Where do you think we're going to go? How long do you think these fires in LA are going to last? Are we going to finally get control over it anytime soon? And is it something that people are just going to live with, or could there be any change because of this in our attitudes about planning for the future, or about trying to deal with situations like this?
Well, it's going to have to come after like these 4 years. That's, at least for a federal response to this, you're not going to see this administration like think like that. It's just they're more concerned with like cutting expenditure and like just cannibalizing the government from the inside than like doing like sensible investment in like future proofing against climate change, which they dubiously do not really believe in.
So it's not going to happen anytime in the next couple of years?
Yeah, at the very
Okay.
least. Well, maybe states might be able to do some
Okay.
like local like infrastructure investment to try and like future-proof themselves, but there's not going to be a.
Yeah, weirdly enough, the power goes back into the states in a sense, for them to determine if they can improve or not. Kind of a weird scenario.
Okay, any other final thoughts? All right, small crowd, but a good crowd, good discussion. Do we have any topics planned for next week? Have we discussed any yet?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay,
But I mean, you can always check our Instagram. We always do like a post for the.
yeah, we are, for those of you who are listening in, for those of you who may be checking out our YouTube, we do this every Wednesday at noon. We live stream, and these will be available. And check our Instagram site, UNGPSSA. Check our Facebook site, UNGPSSA, and join us on UNG Connect. And we'll be here a week from today.
You need me to take the tripod back to.
No, I'll take that.
All right.
I'll go back down.